Welcome everyone to the Jury Award Conversation Series. Today we are speaking with the winners of the Scripted Digital Series Award presented by Stage 13, the Short Screenplay Award, the Playwriting Competition Award, and Fiction Podcast Competition Award. Before we hop into the conversation, I want to first briefly touch on some context. So this is the 27th year of the Austin Film Festival Script Competition, and this year we received a record number of 13,175 scripts. Out of this bunch, we had 3 respective finalists within all 4 of these categories. And so, as always, our goal with the competition each year is to help discover the next generation of writers and help all writers who engage with us hone and advance their craft. So before we hop into the conversation, I briefly want to introduce all of the guests we have on today. So to start, we have the winner of the Digital Series Award presented by Stage 13, which is Michelle Sarkany, who wrote Lady Mozart. Congratulations. The winner of the Short Screenplay Award, Stephen Schuyler, who wrote Like You Think You Know Me. The Playwriting Competition winner, Matt Ackels, who wrote Wake the Body. And the Fiction Podcast Competition winner, Kareem Badr, and Mike Delonzo, who co-wrote Curtains.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining today with this conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. So just want to start with the first question. So, I'm curious, what recognition may or may not do for your drive as an artist, with an accomplishment like this, does it change the way you think about the daily grind in terms of, being a writer?
Sure. I know for me, it has a huge impact on day to day. There's so much that you're doing as a writer where you're just locked in a bubble and submitting constantly. And so you'll hear feedback from peers or from people that you trust to read it, but none of it feels really solidified until you hear some kind of professional feedback. So at least from my end, this, above and beyond anything else, is just kind of this big flashing light saying that something I'm doing is working and I'm right to keep dedicating so many hours and so many days and so many years to kind of pursuing this craft and pursuing these kind of stories, because it is connecting with somebody in some way, and it actually is kind of creating that emotional reaction to the material.
I think for me, it's sort of like, I agree with what Steven's saying, but it's a vote of confidence that encourages me to kind of sit in that uncomfortable state that I'm in on the current thing I'm writing, and that I feel like I'm always in whatever I'm writing. And I joke with friends that writing feels like whatever you're writing is terrible until the very last day you finish it. And so 99% of your time, you know what you're working on is terrible. And that's hard to kind of like push yourself through. And so for me to be lucky enough to sort of get recognition for something, with a piece that was recognized by you guys, it was one that was really hard for me to write, really uncomfortable for me to write. And so it's a nice vote of confidence in don't take the easy way out when you're writing something. Usually when you sit in that uncertainty and that difficulty, good things can happen. And if you're afraid of that uncertainty, you might just write something very tropey or very standard. So it's a nice reminder that things can feel bad at the time and end up decent. So that's how I feel.
I feel like in our case, having a partner sort of alleviates a little bit of that, right? Because we have stuff, we've the ability to bounce off of each other during the whole process. But I've always said that this is the sort of profession where you don't have quite as many signposts along the way that tell you that you're headed in the right direction. So you could go for a really, really, really long time until you see one, and then when you do, you're like, oh, okay, I'm headed the right way. It hasn't been 1,000 miles in the wrong direction.
Even finding out that we were semifinalists, I think our reaction was, well, shit, I guess we got to keep writing this thing. Because we submitted a pilot. We have the whole season arced, but we're like, I guess we really need to get back to it.
I guess I can't quit now.
Yeah, right.
In it for the long haul.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm a little more up and down where it's not like the whole time it's garbage. It's kind of like, oh, I'm a genius. And then I'm like, reread it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's garbage. And so it's a lot of that up and down. So yeah, this recognition kind of like you finally see that, oh yeah, I was right in the genius part, maybe once in a while. And then the key is like how to utilize this momentum to like move forward.
Yeah, because like so much of it is subjective, right? There's so many things that you're trying to write and you think, well, I like this, but is anybody else actually going to like this? Does anybody even care? Like, is this scene boring? The scene seems great to me, but is somebody else going to watch it and start yawning? And this is just kind of like that reaffirmation to just keep going and pushing in those directions.
Affirmation was the word I was thinking of. Like, it's so rare as a writer, regardless of what you're writing, what medium, like usually it feels like you're writing something and then essentially sticking it in a drawer and going, well, that's the thing I did. So it's you're, like you said, you're in a bubble, you're in this echo chamber. So to get any little bit of affirmation that kind of nudges you along, I think is, it's rare and valuable.
I'm curious, what is y'all's kind of relationship to feedback, and how do you kind of seek that out? Like, and this can be, Kareem and Mike, y'all are writing partners, so I'm sure there's kind of that dynamic there. But Matt, Michelle, and Steven, and Kareem and Mike, even if y'all are doing individual projects, like how do you get that feedback, and like do you have people you trust, or I'm just curious about your process with that.
So we had a super interesting incubator for this project, right? I'm a part owner of a production company called 819 Entertainment, and Kareem a while back had an idea to have sort of a freelance writer's room. So to put together a writer's room of people who had projects that were just homeless. So we had 8 writers in the room. We did about a year's worth of pitching and writing and revamping and development of each other's pitches, and came out with like 5 pilots. And it just so happened that in the first week of pitching, Kareem and I had an idea. We've known each other for like 20 years. We've never worked on anything before this other than improv comedy. And so we had an idea that was very similar, just in a bubble. Like, we had never talked about it. And we just were like, well, we know each other. This would be an interesting experiment. Let's see if we could put it together and make it work. Wow. But we had that kind of feedback the whole way, right? Like, we had a room full of people that we got notes from, that we were also giving notes to their projects. And then we did a reading about halfway through, a staged reading, and got feedback from people in that way. So we solicited and got like really legitimate, genuine feedback all the way through the process. And we're open to that right off the bat. So I think we were lucky in that respect.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I know for me, my wife and I work on almost all of our film content together. We co-direct. She sometimes writes things. I spend a lot of time writing things as well. And there's just, when you have a partner to work on things and to work through things with, it really kind of helps you kind of set a good gauge of what's working and what's not. But that being said, I revise things to death. I've even done revisions on this script since submitting it, planning to somehow go into production. And then once we get actors involved, there's going to be more revisions based on what the actors bring to it. And then especially with this one, I was really lucky that I actually got a fellowship for this through Saul Zantz to help figure out a way to bring it into production. And that got shut down with COVID, of course. But that kind of next step and push of encouragement really kind of, it just keeps me coming back and thinking, how can I make every detail of this better? Because you never really know until you're getting into production. Like, I had just one last little thing. I had a movie that played at Austin 4 years ago, a short film called Mala. And that script didn't even make the second round when I submitted it to the competition. But by the time we got to shooting it, it had gone through so many changes and so many rewrites, and so much got changed in rehearsal and so much more got brought out of it that, I don't know, I feel like I can never really stop working on something to improve it. That there's always, no matter how good you think it is, it can always get better.
I like to write comedy, so it's even harder because it's so subjective even more. So I have like just this tiny group of trusted few other screenwriters that I will send even the outline to, just to be like, is any of this funny? Is the idea funny? Is it just me who thinks it's funny? And sometimes they don't get it, but I still write it. And sometimes they like it, you know, especially this story, which is actually based on real people, which is the first time I've ever done that. It's based on, you know, Mozart and his sister, who is a real person, but nobody even knew she existed. So it was sort of like, how do you take this sort of sad story about real people, make it funny and made up also, and whose opinion do you trust really is the hard thing. With comedy, in the end, you kind of have to be like, well, I think it's funny, so I'm going to send it to Austin and see what they think. And that's what happened.
Yeah, for me, I think feedback is my revision process in that. And I think I'm just going to expose myself as a fraud, but I always think like my goal is to send it to people, and then maybe they have a good idea I didn't have, and then I get to use that idea. And you guys in Austin think that I came up with all of it, and I can point to tons of spots in my script where I say, oh, this friend thought of that, and that line came from that actor or whatever it is. And it's great. It's like legal plagiarism, and it's super helpful. But I think that like, for me, I see my task as being really continuing to hone my compass and my aesthetic perspective to where I know objectively, is this good or is this bad? Yeah. I don't feel very capable of making something bad good. So that's when I go to get feedback. It's like, I know this thing is 66% of where it needs to be, and I don't know how to make it better, but I know it could be better. So I often feel like I turn for feedback, and I do it from the outlining process all the way through, like Steven said, I mean, all the way to the end. But for me, it's always at a point where I feel like I sit down at the desk and I don't know what to do next, and I can't make it better, but I also know it's not good enough. So it's great. A steal from your friends is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Right? Have smart friends.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess another one, you know, I guess what excites you most about writing scripts, like that format itself? Is there something that draws you specifically to that format? Matt, I know you wrote a play, but like, just kind of speaking to that, and are there other mediums that you kind of dip into to kind of hone your practice, and if so, kind of what's your kind of reason behind that?
My background is in improv. I've been doing it for about 15 years, and specifically narrative improv. So I'm basically a story nerd who's been internalizing story structure for the sake of being able to improvise it in the moment without any luxury of editing. So I'm constantly working that story muscle. But the thing that I love about anything, and script writing in particular, is collaboration. Like like Mike said, the reason that we kind of put this writer's room project together was I literally was like, I feel like I've been training for over a decade to thrive in a writer's room. How do I make that happen? And then we just kind of threw people together. The act of collaborating with people and getting to ask, what if? Have you thought about what if we had a character that fulfilled this goal or this story need? Collaboration is everything for me. I would hate to sit in a room and write alone. I don't think I would enjoy it. I don't think I would enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, as far as other, like what draws you to it, like I feel inspired by any number of kinds of scripts to write. Like, so I've written sitcoms, I've written features, I've written plays, I've written. Last night I watched David Byrne's American Utopia on HBO, and I was like, I want to do a concept concert in the way and I just, everything that I enjoy, I feel gravitated at some point to trying it. Like, especially when I was younger and I lived in LA, I was in my 20s, and I thought like, oh, I need to make money doing this. This has to be a career. I'm going to just write a feature and then buy a bar, because that was what was happening in the mid 90s. Right. And now I'm like, you know, screw it. Like, I'm just going to write what makes me happy. And I know that's, people say that all the time, and you're like, it's the same as like when you meet the person you're going to marry, you just know. People, when you don't do that, you're like, that's bullshit. That'll never happen. And then it happens, and you're like, oh my God, everybody was right. This is exactly the same way. When you find the project that you really like, it's easy. It was like, this was the easiest script I ever wrote. And we wrote every word together, like literally sat on 2 laptops trading words back and forth. It was just easy. You know what I mean? Like you find that thing and it's fun, you know, and that's oversimplifying something that's a labor, but yeah.
I think for me, I mean, I think your question is really apt, Sage, because the word excite is really what I think I'm looking for in going into a project. And I think maybe I do. We were talking before the call, and I'm from a small town, Texas, and maybe I have that like Texas masochist football kid in me. But for me, I get excited if it sounds hard and it sounds like something I haven't done before. And I actually write mostly. My job is a TV writer, so most of the time I'm writing for television, and this piece here is a play. And what that came out of was I had just finished a sort of a very hooky, very plotty, twisty pilot, and I felt like it was good for what it needed to be. But I was like, can I even write? Like, could I even do this if all of the bells and whistles were gone and it was just 3 characters in a room for an hour and a half? And that's what this play is. I mean, there's no scene changes, there's no extra characters. But that's what was exciting to me about it, is it was like, I'm going to sort of strip away all the artifice and try to engage basically just on dialogue alone. And by the time I finished this play, I was like, oh my God, screw that. I need to go write like a genre piece, because I'm so tired of this room. But I think you're always looking for not just what excites you about writing, because life is long. It's like, what excites you about this piece that you've maybe never explored before, or you've never been passionate about until this month. And I think that's key. If you are writing something you're not excited about, and don't get me wrong, it's challenging, and I sound like maybe I am the masochist on the call, because I do hate it most days. But if you're not excited, it's just going to be flat on the page.
And I think there's something to be said about the genre that you're writing in too, because I grew up in a very poor part of Baltimore City, and where I grew up, forget about college, most kids never even finished high school. The idea of spending $20,000, $30,000 to make a short film, to prove myself, to be able to make a feature, that's an impossibility. So I always wanted to tell stories. And for me, it was figuring out what that meant, how to do that, and what form to do that in. So I went to school for fiction. I got a graduate degree in fiction. My thesis was a novel that will probably never see the light of day without major revisions. But what that did is it started to get me familiar with different forms that stories can take. And the thing that really drew me to screenwriting was this constant challenge of how do you make the internal external. That in a book, if I want my character to remember a point in their childhood that caused a trauma that they're coming into contact with now, I can just say that. But if I'm doing that visually in a film, and I don't want to be reliant on flashbacks, I don't want to be reliant on some kind of gag in the moment, how do I do that? How do I make you feel what's going on in their head without stating it overtly? And for me, that challenge in every single screenplay is what draws me in every time, because every time it's new. No matter who the character is, no matter what the story is, it's always a new challenge of how do you take what's in here and put it there for the audience to not only see, but feel and experience.
I think that's a really interesting question, actually, because I have been thinking about that recently. Like, why don't I just write a novel? Like, why don't I just write a book and then it's done and it's a thing, which and I'm just like, there, it's done. But I don't know. I besides just being compelled to write screenplays for some reason that I can't explain, or maybe I just haven't had the novel idea yet. And then when it's the novel idea, I'll know and I write a novel. Not that that's easy or anything, but I feel like screenwriting is kind of an interesting writing career, because it's like the beginning of the thing. So you're like creating this whole world, but it's not the thing, the movie's the thing, or the TV show, or the play, or whatever you're writing for. So I think in a way, whatever I write, I just think, well, this is the beginning of a thing that I want to make or see in the world, kind of selfishly for myself. So I think that's my reason, at least, for
it
this.
being the beginning of the thing is what's always in the past has stopped me from explicitly from working on screenplays. Because on the one hand, I feel like writing screenplays is an exercise in efficiency, which I love. But on the other hand, you are spending time to essentially draw up intricate blueprints for a beautiful house that maybe someday will get made, and when it gets made, it might look like a McDonald's, and it's like that stopped me for so long. It's like, I don't know, but the actual act of doing it is exciting, because you have to be efficient and solve lots of problems, but who knows what'll happen, right?
I think maybe I need to take some improv classes is maybe a between spot.
And I think there's that recognition too, that like you're saying, Michelle, like, it doesn't mean that if you're writing a screenplay that there is no other type of form, but every story kind of has its own inherent form almost, like the story, Matt, that you're telling in a play, you might be able to tell that in a screenplay, but
no, yeah, right.
Yeah, like, would it be the same story? How much of it has to change? What has to, like, how much of the emotional impact of that story and that journey and those characters has to get completely rethought to find this new genre of storytelling?
Yeah, definitely. And I think to Michelle, like you're saying, I mean, when you have an idea, I think you have to pick the right genre. Some ideas are TV shows, and maybe those are similar to novel ideas. Some ideas are finite and they're features, and some ideas are even smaller and they're plays. And I think that, like, I like exploring different genres, but it's nice to let the idea and the story decide what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like this script, Lady Mozart, started out in my head as a feature. Obviously, it's a feature. And then the more I learned about the characters and just writing the outline, which was a feature outline, I was like, no, it's got to be a series. It's just got to be some kind of serialized form. So, yeah.
Well, and chances are no one's going to see or buy what we write anyway, like mathematically. So we may as well write what it is the piece itself wants to be, rather than force ourselves into a box that might never get opened.
Sure. So I want to take a step back and kind of ask, what sparked your interest in writing, screenplays or just writing in general? And at what point in your journey did you decide to really take it seriously and devote time to it? I'm wondering if there was a mentor or, if there's just some of course it's probably a series of events, but if there's anything that stands out in your mind that okay, this was kind of, this is really when I started to take it seriously and yeah.
Man, I started writing sketch comedy when I was in college, and one of my best friends and partners then was a person who is now a screenwriter who had the most unbelievable work ethic of any human being I've ever met at the age of 19, and taught me how to focus and how long the process was and how deep you had to go and what a journey it was to do a long-term project like that, just doing that kind of stuff. And then, man, over the course of I've been on film sets, I've been, a producer, I've been an actor, all of those things drive you in different ways to want to create this stuff on your own, and then every bit that you can crib from each part of that you I could see how a director would do this thing, or I could see, as an executive producer, I can see how much money they're willing to spend on this. I can see, how much the cherry pickers are going to cost, all of that kind of stuff. It's like making a soup, right? This just mise en place of all this stuff that you pick up over the course of time that you can finally start cooking with and being okay, I can navigate this now and see where it's going to go. And in this particular case, this thing that we were doing was crying out to be a narrative podcast, because it's essentially an old-timey radio show. And so that was the hook for us, was this is these narrative podcasts are the new style, gather around the radio and listen to The Shadow and stuff like that, and so it sort of it sort of lent itself to that. And that was super fascinating to, I think, both of us, as far as like what the actual thing was. That didn't answer the question at all. But
No, you got it in the beginning. Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I had to think about it actually, like how did I start? And it's actually, I definitely didn't start like at 10 years old knowing I want to make movies and stuff like that. I was like, gotta be responsible, gotta go to school, gotta get a job and just do what you do. And then you just sort of like weird events happen that make you sort of question where you are in life. And then you're like, I just realized I wanted to be involved in film. And I just randomly mentioned it to someone that I didn't even know that well. And he had a friend who was a teacher, but also made films. So I worked as a PA for a while on a film in New York. And then you're like, well, which job do I want here? And being on set is just like so hard, but exciting. You know, there's so much involved. And then I just I'd always just written weird stories also throughout my life, but never found the screenwriting route, because how would you know? So yeah, I think I worked on a film set, and then I realized that my stories wanted to be screenplays, and I sort of started learning how to write a screenplay. And so yeah, like, you know, just all the weird I'll say idiosyncratic kind of tales that I sort of lean towards, and it just seems right for film.
Yeah, mine's kind of been a long journey of a lot of different mentors and a lot of different people along the way. I have always wanted to tell stories, but wasn't kind of as firmly grounded in what form that would take. And it actually began as kind of fine arts and photography, and then led into just kind of crashing film sets for big productions around Baltimore, until I could get hired by different people here and there. And then just a pursuit of how can I tell these stories, and how can I make these things happen? And eventually what winds up happening is I meet somebody who, like I was saying before, my wife and I co-direct so much that we just kind of support each other, and we find ways to make it happen. You know, we can't always get all of the people to fill every role that we need on set. So we have, over the years, learned how to do a lot of it ourselves. You know, she will do post sound if we can't afford to hire somebody for post sound. I do freelance color and freelance cinematography. You know, we kind of just bounce everything off of each other. And sometimes, like we're hoping will happen with Like You Think You Know Me, we're lucky enough to get a grant to help fund production. And so we can hopefully go into production on this after COVID. But those aren't the only kind of stories we tell. You know, we made a movie, a short film that was about 7 minutes long in the beginning of March, that had 3 people on set, including she and I. You know, there weren't that many people there because we just weren't making it that big of a production. We wanted just to keep doing it. So no matter what, just always saying, we have new stories we want to tell. We're always writing new things. We're always making new things. We're always putting out new things. And having somebody that you can lean on like that, you know, for as many mentors as I've had over different stages of my life, it's kind of that long term of just like, you know, that partnership, that creative partnership that just keeps driving it forward, at least for me.
Yeah, I this is super interesting, everybody. It's so cool, I think, to hear people's background. I always feel like I don't have this like superhero origin story. You know, you get this question a lot, like when did you know you wanted to be a writer? And it's like, I've always, for the longest time, I felt sort of nervous that I didn't have that. And you look at all the kind of great writers and these types of interviews, and they all have this incredible answer. And then it hit me, I have this theory now that really you're just looking at really good storytellers tell a story about their past. Like, you know, people are like, oh, I got a typewriter that didn't have a K when I was in 7th grade. Nothing I write has a K in it. And you're like, holy shit, I'll never be a writer because that's insane. But then you're like, no, that guy just cherry picked some absurd semi-lie out of his life. And so if I'm saying anything, I'm saying I hope maybe someone's watching this and feeling like, oh, I don't have this superhero cape Clark Kent in a telephone booth story about why I'm a writer. I think some of that is artifice. I think that like writers are normal people who just work really hard at something they want to do, just like people in other professions do. And if it's what you want to do, I think it's very worthwhile. I think I personally, I'm not saying I'm self-important, but I think it is important to tell good stories in our society. And if you want to do it, just do it. And like it is a valid profession. It is a valid pursuit. So yeah, I don't know. I've been sitting here thinking for 15 minutes, like, which story should I tell from my past about, like, my sister wrote a Christmas pageant and I changed one word. But the truth is, like, I don't know. It's just like, I think it's like what I do, and I just try to do it well, you know?
Yeah. I once heard an interview with J.J. Abrams where they were like, you know, what advice do you have? What advice do you have for young screenwriters? And he is like, finish your script. He's like, if you finish your script, you're going to be ahead of 99% of the people you've ever met. Yeah. Right. And that's so true. Like, you know, people just languish for years and years and years. And like, I lived in LA for a really long time, especially all my friends were like, oh, I got a script I've been sitting on for 6 years. And it's like, well, why haven't you finished it? Well, I'm just waiting for that, you know, I'm waiting for that inspiration to get to the last 20 pages. Like, no, just finish it, you know?
Yeah, inspiration is just a schedule of telling yourself every day, I'm going to sit down from this time to that time and work. No matter if it's good or bad, no matter if I like it or not, generate as much material as possible, because you're not going to know what's good until it's on the page.
For me, I think just going back to what I said earlier, I've always liked story, and I like ripping stories apart and figuring out how they tick. And so, you know, being an improviser or starting as an improviser, I love collaboration. I love taking someone's idea and adding to it and figuring out the angle that they maybe didn't have in mind, but seems obvious in the moment, and just like creating things together is so exciting and inspiring to me. Yeah, there's nothing I love more than to create a story, whether it's on stage, you know, on the page, in the moment, edited over months. Like, to get to work with people and craft a story is, super fun. Yeah. That makes me go.
Well, thank you all so much for joining today, and again, congratulations on y'all's achievement. Really huge, just great work. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.